Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching by Rabbi Rebecca Schatz.
Today we're going to talk about the daughters of Shlofchad. In a moment I'll pass around a source sheet. It's hard for me to not teach about the daughters of Shlofchad every year. Not because the story changes, but because unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know, their story still seems extremely relevant to a world in which this is unfortunately still happening to women or to really any minorities all the time, right? Minorities of race, minorities of ethnicity, minorities of religion, minorities of gender, right? This is happening to any non-majority all the time still until the 21st century. And so the fact that it comes up in our Torah in such a prominent way, right? The Haftorah even that we read today was not just a parallel story, it was the repetition of this story in our prophets, right? So not only does it show up in the Torah, and it actually shows up in our Torah twice, this is just the first time, but it shows up in our Torah, in our prophets. We're going to read a passage where it shows up in the Talmud. It's very important to our tradition and to our rabbis, and I think that in a world where sometimes we can be critical of really any religion, but I'm most comfortable with our own. In religion, when we have a hard time recognizing that minority voices are uplifted, Judaism actually does do a very good job. That doesn't always mean that minorities of whatever system feel heard or feel as though they are mentioned. But if you read through the Talmud, for example, there's an actual word that is used to allow the reader to understand that the rabbis are sharing all opinions, not just the one that we're going to go with, not just the majority opinion, but also the minority opinion. So it's not so crazy that this story is in our Torah talking about a minority opinion and a minority voice coming to the forefront and making changes for a people. But it is the kind of story that I think needs to be brought out every single year to remind ourselves that this is important and that we should be doing this all the time in our world, not just when Parshat Pinchas happens to come about in the Torah. So we're going to look pretty intently into this Parsha and into this story. You will notice that this particular source sheet does not have as much Hebrew as I usually put on the source sheet. That's not because this didn't come from sources that are written in Hebrew or in Aramaic, but because I didn't want to give you a very long source sheet and I knew that we would read the English. So if you're interested in the original, you're obviously welcome to look back at any of the sources that I've given you and find it in the original in your Chumash or at home in a Talmud if you'd like, or maybe we even have it in our Talmuds over there. Okay, first and foremost, what is the number one thing that people point out about the daughters of Shlofchad? Okay, that the father had no sons. What's the first thing we notice about the daughters of Shlofchad specifically? They speak up. Even before that. They have names. And that's actually quite important, right? Because when was the last time that you heard of a woman's name? Are you looking for a child? No, for the source sheet. Oh, with the source sheet. There are more going around. I was like, your child I can't help with, but there is a good chance that her child could be up here. So the last time that we heard a woman's name was that wasn't the daughter of someone else. Let me be very clear. The last time we heard a woman's first name was Miriam. Right? We know Yocheved, she's before Miriam, and we know of the wives of, but their names are Bat Kozbi is the most recent one that we read. And that actually, that doesn't tell us who the person is, right? It tells us who their father was, and it tells us who their lineage is, but it doesn't actually tell us the person's name. Right? If I went around as the daughter of Dale, you would say like, oh, that's great, we love Dale, but who are you? Right? And he's a great guy, but I'm also my own person, right? And so were they. And so that was important that we knew their names from the outset. So I'm going to read for us. Now, Tzlofchad, son of Hefer, had no sons, only daughters. The names of Tzlofchad's daughters were Machla, Noah, Chogla, Milka, and Tirza. This is why only giving you English is hard, because it's hard to read transliteration. 5 daughters. You know their names. Their names don't become really important later on in terms of interpretation of names or anything like that, like sometimes we do with other characters. But it's important that you know who you are and you can call them by name. Okay? These are the descendants of Ephraim by their clans. We just read about this in the Haftarah. Among these shall the land be apportioned as shares. Now, this is very important. According to the listed names, by the way, I skipped a few 20 verses here, 20-ish verses here. This was where all of the clans were listed, okay? And you would have had a 25-page source sheet if I had included them. But just take my word for it. There's lots and lots and lots of names and clans listed in between here. So the land is going to be apportioned as shares to these names that I didn't give you. With larger groups, increase the share. With smaller groups, reduce the share. All right, makes sense. 50 people need more space than 20 people. Right, that doesn't mean 50 people are more important. It just means that 50 people need more space. So if you're giving over land, it makes sense that they would have more space. Each is to be assigned its share according to its enrollment. The land, moreover, is to be apportioned by lot, and the allotment shall be made according to the listings of their ancestral tribes. Each portion shall be assigned by lot, whether for larger or smaller groups. Does this say anything about gender? No. So what could we assume from this if we didn't know what happens next? It's not a trick question. Yeah, that everybody gets a lot. That every clan gets a lot. No matter who you are, no matter how big you are, everyone gets something. Okay? But then we go on to say, the daughters of Tzlofchad, and it gives you again their names, right? Interesting that they're named again, even though we knew their names before. They stood before Moshe, Eleazar the priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting. What's interesting about that? Say it again. Everything about it is interesting.
It's very public.
Very public. Very official. Right? They don't just go to Moshe and ask for a private meeting. Right now, this is not what this teaching is about, but it came to mind when you said private, that there are families of hostages who are in Washington, D.C., right, meeting with Bibi and with Biden and others, obviously. But they had there were other public things, but they had private moments. There were private things to share, private pleas to share that would have been different had it been in front of a big group. Here, they were like, no, we're going to bypass the private. Anything that we would say to one person, we can say to all of you, because we need everybody to hear that we're doing this, not just Moshe. Now, does this give them a better chance of something happening or a lesser chance of something happening? It's a risky move. Why is it risky? Okay, because they're women. Why else is it risky?
Rejection in public is very different from rejection in private.
Great. Exactly. More what? More exposed, right? And yes, rejection in public is very different than rejection in private, for sure. For anybody who's ever supervised someone, you know that if you're unhappy with the person who you supervise, you don't say so at a staff meeting, you say so in private, right? But the other problem that they could have come up against is the more people who hear about this, and this goes back to the idea that they're women, the more people that hear what they want to do, the more people who can say no. Right? If they had just gone to Moshe, not because Moshe's a pushover, but because Moshe usually wanted people to be happy, he probably would have just said yes, right? Or that he needed to check with God, which is what happens later. But doing this in front of a large group, there could have been lots of people that would have said, oh, this is too much for us. Yeah.
And conversely, it's precedent setting.
Yeah.
It could be this declaration to the entire community
Right.
that says, if they can do this,
right,
given their status,
so can we.
The rest of us do?
Right. Totally precedent setting, which is in a world of a community, right? You have to think about who's coming before people, right? If I have this guest come, does that mean that anybody who has affiliation to that kind of whatever is now going to want to come, right? We were talking about this recently in terms of, if we're doing these Friday nights with instruments, does that set a precedent that there's always going to be instruments now on Friday night? There aren't. I mean, you might think that we're setting a precedent, but we aren't. But it does. It allows people to see what could be, right? That they didn't know could be and what could be. Yeah, Bobby.
Yeah, and also, like, if you zoom out even a little bit more, the context matters, where it's like with Korah.
Good. Right. Great. And those protocols that are changing at the hands of people who feel like they can be the change, right? Which is really interesting. It's no one told them to go before all these people. They, as the daughters, decided, all right, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it in a way that's going to change those protocols. Did you have a hand up? Okay. They said, our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the faction, Korach's faction, so funny that you brought that up, Bobby, which banded together against God, but died for his own sin. So he wasn't a bad guy, right? This whole Korach's faction were people that were seen in our Torah to not be such great people. But he died for his own sin. He died for something that he did, and he has left no sons. Let not our father's name be lost to his clan just because he had no son. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen. So what are they not saying? Yeah, Nancy. Good. Great. Exactly. What they are not saying is, give us the land. We deserve it. We don't have brothers or brother. What? Okay. Where? Yeah. Right. But so that their father's name continues in legacy. So it's not, they weren't coming to all of these people and saying, we have no brother, now we need something. What they were saying was, we have no brother, our father deserves a legacy, we are that legacy. So what they're saying is not, you wouldn't have given us something because we're women. What they are saying is, our father deserves a legacy, and so we should be able to get a portion of land because we are his legacy, right? So some people would say this is a very feminist text, and other people would say this is not a feminist text at all because they should have said that it should be for them, right? And that can be another argument for another time. That wasn't why I brought this today, but I wanted to share that because I think lots of people come to this text and think, wow, what a beautiful feminist text. And then there are some people who read this and think to themselves, wait a second, if it was really a feminist text, would they have mentioned would they kind of have used their dad's name as the way of getting something, or would they have just said they needed it? I actually not sure that it matters. I think it's important that they came forward. I think that's the part that matters, and that's the feminism in the story. So Moses then brings this case before God. So all of these people heard about it, but Moshe still thinks, okay, but God needs to know about it. God says to Moses, the plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen, transfer their father's share to them. Further, speak to the Israelite people as follows. So this is God now changing the law, right, in real time. Now, just to Moses, right? Moses then has to share it with everybody else, which we know is his favorite thing to do. But he has to share it with everybody else, but it is being changed in real time. Right? This is a moment that similar to our Talmud, actually, where something that hasn't worked for the people is now being changed to work for them. If a whole householder dies without leaving a son, you shall transfer the property to his daughter. If he has no daughter, you shall assign his property to his brothers. Right? So is anybody in a family of only brothers? Okay. Okay, great. So there are people in the room for whom that works. So if you didn't have, if you had no children, right, it would then go to your siblings. Lost my place, sorry. If he has no brothers, you shall assign his property to his father's brothers, etc., etc. So what doesn't happen here? Yeah. It doesn't totally change, right? The law changes a little. The law changes for if the father has daughters, but the law doesn't change retroactively. The law doesn't change such that if that generation doesn't have daughters, that if you go back, you couldn't then give it to the daughter or the son. You still prefer the male heir, right, or the male generation, right, which is interesting. Ariel?
2 questions.
Yeah.
One is, it doesn't mention anything of if there's a widow.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I'm curious,
Yeah.
if we see that anywhere in the text.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
By a sign in the piece of land.
Yeah, because land was always by tribe, and tribe always went by oldest male. So yeah, it would be it would be named, so to speak, and would be by those people. And so in this case, it would be by the oldest daughter. Yeah, but the widow part is a really interesting point that doesn't actually get brought up at all. But my guess is that there is an element of, there not being, again, not women who are related beyond, thanks, Hector. Ralph, he can come in if he wants. That this is not a piece where there are women who are mentioned when not of that generation. Yeah, Stuart.
Which we'll get to a little bit later in Bava Batra.
Yeah.
At the end, Bava Batra does, based on this story.
He can sit in. Yeah.
Does, based on this story.
Yeah. That Ariel mentioned.
Of the widow.
Oh, really?
And deals. It's very complex discussion.
Oh, interesting.
And it deals with the law of what to do with the widow, and it juxtaposes also because it also has to do with the ketubah.
Oh, interesting.
How
Yeah, sure.
it deals with it. So I don't remember the details about it, but it's.
We'll look in Bava Batra. Okay, great. So Ariel's question is directly answered in Bava Batra, and we can look in that later. Okay, so Bamidbar Rabbah, which is the midrash on this book of Torah, says, as a commentary on this line, then came forward the daughters of Shlofchad, that they came forward to all these other people. In that generation, the women were raising a fence about the law that the men were breaching. Right. So what the rabbis are saying here, and I just want to keep reminding us of this not because I think it's so important that we talk about the gender piece, but because I want you to remember how things are written in our tradition. Male rabbis wrote this. Right? So it's interesting that even the midrash written by male rabbis are claiming that the women were trying to break a mold here, that the men were upholding and that wasn't working. And the reason I really love this commentary is because it uses language that we use for halakha all the time, that we build fences around halakha to keep us from even coming close to do something that's incorrect. So Shabbat, 25 hours. Why is it 25 hours? Because we might lose track of time and then start breaking Shabbat during those 24 hours. So you need a little bit of time before and you need a little bit of time afterwards to make sure that you're square in the middle of those 24 hours, not breaking Shabbat. Okay, there are lots of other fences. That's a big one. Eating chicken and cheese, chicken and dairy, is actually a big fence around the Torah also, because chickens don't produce milk, just for everyone. And so, but because chicken can be seen as meat in terms of its appearance, right, we don't eat it with dairy. So we put fences around our Torah all the time. And so what our rabbis are saying here is, they're kind of making a pun almost. They're using this language of, we put fences around the Torah, but the women were pushing through those fences to make sure that we knew that the fence wasn't actually necessary, that it didn't make any sense for this generation. Okay, turn the page. Okay, let's go to the Bava Batra piece, and then I will choose in real time which of the two more modern commentaries to read, but we won't read both. So, Bava Batra. Just so that everyone's aware, those of you who learn with me know this, but the bolded parts in the English are the actual Gemara, the actual words of the Talmud. The non-bolded parts are Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz's commentaries to make it understood in English. So the English is going to make sense here, whereas if you read Gemara, the Aramaic has to kind of be explained out to make it make full sentence sense, because it was just transcripts of people reading and learning in a Beit Midrash. Okay. The Gemara continues its discussion of this incident involving Tzlofchad's daughters. The verse states, "And they stood before Moshe and before Eleazar the priest and before the princes and all the congregation." The Gemara asks, is it possible that Tzlofchad's daughters stood before Moshe and then Eleazar to ask their question, and they said nothing to them, and then the daughters stood before the princes and all the congregation to ask them? So the rabbis are now breaking it down here to see, like, did we list all of those things in the Torah so that we imagine that the daughters went to all of these different groups of people, but maybe at different times? Like, oh, maybe we didn't get the answer we wanted the first time, so now we're going to go to this next group of people. How would the princes or the congregation know an answer if Moshe and Eleazar did not? The Gemara answers, rather transpose the verse and interpret it. First, the daughters went to the congregation and ultimately came to Moshe. So interesting here, right? This is not what the Torah says. Remember that these are the rabbis coming up with explanation for the Torah. What the rabbis are trying to get at is that maybe the women first went to the community, took a poll, had a survey, had some house meetings, right? Figured out where's everybody else at, and then we'll go to the leader. I experience this all the time as a rabbi of a congregation, right? People want something to happen. So in committees, they talk about it, or they talk about it at Kiddush, or they talk about it at a board level or whatever. And then it comes to the senior staff, right? Very, very, very rarely does something come to the senior staff before someone has said, and I was talking to so-and-so about. Right? You first go to your people. You want to know, is the pulse correct on this? Am I speaking for all of you when I say this wouldn't be fair? And then they go to the leader. Okay. This is the statement of Rabbi Yoshia. Abba Hanan says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, so a lot of rabbis said in the name of a lot of other rabbis, those enumerated in the verse were all sitting in the house of study, and Tzlofchad's daughters went and stood before all of them at once. First of all, just picture that. A house of men learning, and all of a sudden 5 women come in and say, excuse me, we have a question. Right? I can't really imagine that going over so well, but that takes guts. Right? It takes guts to get up in front of a group of people who already are not in a bad way, but already are not including you in this space, right? This is not your house of study. And they get up in front of them and they say, here's something to study. Study this. Figure out if this is something that we are living through right now that should be understood from the text that you're reading. That's my drosh. It doesn't say that here. They were not asked separately. Rather, the order of the verse reflects their stature. The sages taught, the daughters of Tzlofchad are wise. They are interpreters of verses and they are righteous. The Gemara proves these assertions that they are wise can be seen from the fact that they spoke in accordance with the moment. They presented their case at an auspicious time. So they didn't decide this is something relevant to my family. They decided this is something relevant to our people, to our generation, to the way that the world looks and works right now. And I think that what's so powerful about this is that it shows that you don't have to just use tradition in an archaic way, but you can recognize when that tradition is going to grow with you, is going to be able to hold you in the moment that you are in, rather than thinking, oh no, but this was only for the 6th century when we used to have X, Y, and Z. Okay, so now we're in the 21st century. How does that work for us now? And it took a bunch of women recognizing, hey, this doesn't work for us. Now, had there been other daughters for whom this had happened to them before? Probably. But they're not named. We don't know who they are. And they didn't go before anybody and say, this is really important to us. Okay, we're going to read one of these modern commentaries, and I'm going to let the person who I choose be the last voice, and then we'll do Musaf. Okay, let's read Avital Hochstinks. I think we read more of Ethan Tucker normally, so let's read her. And she's a woman. Feels like the appropriate thing to do. Yeah, Ethan Tucker is an amazing rabbi, though. Right before Moshe requests a successor, we hear about the request of the daughters of Tzlofchad. So right before Moshe has to figure out who another leader is, we learn of leadership from women. Interesting. Give us an inheritance amongst our father's brothers. Moshe does not give them an immediate and direct answer. Rather, he refers the matter to God. Moshe brought their claim to God. The divine response is unambiguous. God said to Moshe as follows, "Indeed, the daughters of Tzlofchad speak justly." God here is able to embrace the statements and claims of the daughters of Tzlofchad to proclaim them as just even when their words push beyond the mainstream thinking of the day. I would like to suggest that it is Moshe's experience of God here that inspires him to turn to God as the God of spirits, the God who is capable of hearing many different voices and of bringing them into the divine realms of truth and justice. Perhaps this is how we should understand Moshe's request for a man imbued with spirit, someone who understands the spirits of different people. Perhaps Moshe understands and has internalized his own shortcomings. He was not able on his own to fully embrace all of the spirits and to accept the words of the daughters of Tzlofchad. He therefore hopes for a new leader who will succeed him and who can attain these divine heights. That's leadership, right? Leadership, and according to this commentary, leadership here is recognizing, and this comes up in our Talmud also, like, my children have succeeded me, right? That Moshe realizes my time has come, right? You now are seeing something in a generation of people that I couldn't see because my leadership has already happened. And now this is something that you're seeing because you're becoming part of this new generation. And that's really powerful to come also from the mouth of women, because that is not something you don't think of succession in this time. You don't think of succession coming in the form of daughters, right, of women, but you definitely don't think of succession with a little bit of pushback coming from the mouth of women in this time. You want to share something?
Well, I was going to say,
Yeah.
In the name of everything that you're saying,
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting that it seems to me that the real challenge here is actually to say we're not talking about land. We're not talking about a share.
Right.
What we're talking about is tzedek. The question here is justice.
Yeah.
Do you all deem it just or not just?
Right.
That we should get this lot. And
Yeah.
It's interesting in the translation that you offered.
Yeah.
Adonai said to Moshe, the plea,
Yeah.
not begging.
Interesting. Yeah.
The plea of the daughters is
Just. Yeah.
This is a just legal action
Yeah.
to take.
Interesting.
Because we're not talking about the material.
Yeah.
This is immaterial.
Sure.
And therefore, what they're really pushing for is, how are we moving forward?
Right. Land is just the way of getting in front of the committee, right? But really, what they're trying to say is, how do we move forward? And we're going to bring this to the stand with something tangible. But that's not the point. Yeah, really, really beautiful point. Okay, 1, 2, and then we're going to move off.
I just happen to be in Daf Yomi. I happen to be reading this week.
Yeah. Oh, awesome.
This section, and it's part of in the Baba Batra section. It's part of a series of pages on this. And one of the things that's interesting is that this comes in the context, as you know, of succession and a inheritance, basically.
Yeah.
And there is a consistent minority position, and I knew we were discussing this today. I didn't know exactly the name of the rabbi, but there's a consistent minority position of coming fairly close to what you would characterize as a much more feminist position. That the logical import of what Tzlofchad's daughters are asking is essentially they'd be given close to the same rights of inheritance
interesting.
as men. It is consistently knocked down.
Interesting.
For all the reasons you see here.
Yeah.
And you're left with this. But I am so surprised that it is given such consistent voice over a number of pages, and it kind of goes along with what you were saying about the justice of it, tzedek, because the argument is given full flesh out weight.
Sure.
And it's rejected, but boy, you can find argument, for a much more feminist position in these pages.
And it's interesting because I think that by having it in these pages, hi Dina, by having it in these pages, the idea that you read it over and over again, maybe the rabbis just hoped that at some point it wouldn't be the minority, right? That maybe Bava Batra left it in there as the minority opinion because they knew that in that moment it was being knocked down, as you're sharing. But maybe this story and those words in Bava Batra are left in so that at some point we recognize, no, this is no longer minority opinion. This is what we should be doing, and we should be uplifting something that was once minority opinion to now be how we live in a more just world. Yeah, I'm really curious to look into that because that's really fascinating. Okay, Bobby, last word. Take us home.
Like you were saying earlier about feminism versus just the scope of it, I think it's like when they say in a place where there's no leader striving to be a leader, they actually stood up. It wasn't necessarily about, I feel like in our tradition it's often not necessarily about like male, female, or
totally.
It's more inclusivity in terms of looking at the bigger picture of situational Judaism and saying, hey, like in this instance, where can we, like, what makes sense? Justice or not? And how can we, change it to make people feel like they actually belong and they are.
Totally. Yeah, and I guess I'm not giving you the last word. I think that there is something powerful in what you're saying that we very rarely talk about it as female versus male or minority versus majority opinion. But for all of Moshe's leadership, he's constantly trying to get someone else to do the leadership for him, right? He's constantly trying to see someone else who is listening better, who can speak better, who can be in front of a group better. And that like that Pirkei Avot verse that you quoted, we are constantly as a people trying to figure out, and I think that our modern day rabbi, I hope that our modern day rabbis do this as well. We're constantly trying to lead from within as opposed to above. Because if you lead from above, you have no idea how your people are continuing to grow. And so if you lead from above, you just continue to do the same thing that you always do. But when you hear of good leaders, they are the leaders that have put themselves within a community, within a movement, within a generation, and say either I'm up for this task or let's figure out a way that you can be up for this task, right? And regardless, again, of gender, race, minority, majority, whatever, but just who has their ear to the ground, right? Who is living through something that needs to change for everybody, not just for themselves, and that is leadership.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.